Good evening, friends. Welcome to the West Side Summer Series online. My name is Mark Hickson, and I serve as one of the ministers here. We're excited that you chose to join us online. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I wanted you to be aware that, yes, we are meeting in person on Sunday morning. We're meeting at 10 o'clock, but we ask that if you want to come physically, that you go ahead and bring your masks, be ready to sit apart from people, and also register online. And now this is all just for everyone's safety. We want to be able to worship together and do the right thing while we're doing it. Now, if that's uncomfortable for you, we also have our online service at the same time. That's either on Facebook or on our YouTube page. With that said, we also post our latest announcements or prayer concerns on the West Side Friends and Family Facebook page, and you can log into that after tonight's lesson. Now, for tonight, we have Mr. Cecil May from the Levy Church of Christ in North Little Rock, Arkansas, joining us. He's got some great information to share with us. And so, without further ado, Cecil.
Hello to the Westside Church in Russellville. I bring you greetings from the Levy Church of Christ in North Little Rock. I'm Cecil May, the Connections Minister with Levy Church. I really was looking forward to visiting with you personally during this summer series, but then the pandemic hit, so I know that there at the Westside Church, like us here at Levy, we're just doing the best that we can. So I'm glad to be with you and to share this summer series lesson with you. We had a good bit of freedom. Tim gave us a good bit of freedom in our lesson topic. I wanted to talk, of course, something about Jesus, but I decided we would have to be specific about that in some way. So we're going to take the title that John gave Jesus in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 1, which is Jesus Christ the Righteous. Jesus Christ the Righteous. So if you'll hang with me for about 20 minutes, we will be reminded of a reason that we love Jesus. We'll be motivated to live our lives for Him and instructed by Jesus in some specific ways that we can do that. We do need to define righteousness or righteous so that we'll know just what it is that we're talking about. Righteous really has a very simple definition. It just has to do with right things. Righteousness is doing the right thing. There is a connection between holiness and righteousness. Those two concepts overlap sometimes, so much so they become interchangeable. But if there is a distinction between holiness and righteousness, it is this. Holiness generally speaks of character or essence. Righteousness is more likely in the Bible to emphasize behavior, our action, something that we do. And so it ends up this way. Holiness will practice righteousness. Righteousness demonstrates holiness. Those two things overlap, but there is a bit of a nuance in difference. So we're talking about Jesus Christ the righteous and about how Jesus practiced in His own life and preached righteousness. So here's a couple of things about Jesus Christ the righteous. Jesus practiced righteousness Himself. From the very beginning of His ministry, He said that it was His goal to fulfill all righteousness. You'll remember in Matthew chapter 3, when Jesus showed up to be baptized by John the Baptizer, that John said to him, "Why is it that you have come to me to be baptized? I should be baptized of you." But Jesus responded this way, "I'm here because it's fitting that we should fulfill all righteousness." The obedience to God and the righteousness of John's baptism was a good thing to do. And so by showing up in John's baptismal line, Jesus was choosing to do the right thing, the commandment of God. Later on, as a matter of fact, towards the end of Jesus' ministry, some Pharisees came to him and asked him by what authority he was doing the things that he was doing. And Jesus said, I'll answer your question about my authority if you'll answer my question. And the question that he gave them was, the baptism of John, was that from heaven or from men? That really put those Pharisees in a quandary. They were supposed to be the religious leaders of the day, people who meticulously obeyed the commandments of God. And yet, though they had investigated, they had gone out to hear the preaching of John, they had never submitted to the baptism of John. And so they got in a little huddle, and here's what they discussed among themselves. They said, if we admit that the baptism of John was from heaven, and yet everyone knows that we were not baptized of John, then what we'll be saying is we heard heaven's command and refused to do it. We did not do the right thing. We didn't fulfill righteousness. On the other hand, they said, if we say that John's baptism was from men, then we'll be laughed out of the temple and out of Jerusalem, because everyone knows that John is a prophet of God and that the word he brought was the word of God. So here's how they ended up answering Jesus' question. They said, we can't give you an answer. Jesus, though, unlike those Pharisees, in the very beginning of his ministry, did show up at the River Jordan to be baptized of John. And it's because Jesus wanted to fulfill righteousness. He really wanted to practice every good thing and to have every good thing in his life to be an example of everything that's good. So Jesus was baptized of John, and in doing that fulfilled righteousness. He demonstrated that his life was going to be about practicing righteousness, seeking out and doing every good thing. Jesus also preached righteousness. Let's just consider the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount was, in large part, a sermon about righteousness. Two of the Beatitudes with which Jesus began the Sermon on the Mount are about righteousness. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6, Jesus preached that we should crave righteousness. He said, hunger and thirst after righteousness. What's the thirstiest that you have ever been? Right now we are in temperatures of 90-something degrees, and the heat index is up around 100. So we're likely to have experienced thirst, a craving, a need for some water, for quenching of the thirst lately. Maybe you can remember the thirstiest that you've ever been. My experience with that was when I was a teenager. I was working on a farm, a friend and I, doing some chores in the barn. I noticed that he was not taking any water breaks, but it was hot on that farm, just like it's hot right now. We were enclosed in a building. There was no flow of air much, but my friend wasn't taking water breaks, and so I determined I wouldn't take a water break until he did. I got thirstier and thirstier and thirstier. Finally, he got ready to take a break. He had some water nearby. I ran up to the farmhouse because I was going to quench my thirst there. There was a refrigerator on the screened-in porch. I opened that refrigerator looking for some water, but I saw some beautiful brown liquid which I knew was sweet tea. And I thought just how wonderful that would work in quenching my thirst, the glucose in that tea, something wet but something sweet. And so I took that, poured myself a big glass, and chugged it down, only to find it wasn't sweet tea at all. Later, it was explained to me that that was some vinegar, that there had been some, that the farm lady had pickled some pickles in and then saved it afterwards. I was thirsty enough that day to drink vinegar. I did get down about half a glass before I realized what I was drinking. Jesus said that we're to have craving. We are to desire righteousness like that in our lives. Our body should need righteousness. In the book of Romans, chapter 12 and verse 7, the instruction is, abhor what's evil, but cling to that which is good. Righteousness is about doing right things, and we should crave it, desire it in our lives. Jesus also said in the Sermon on the Mount, in another beatitude, that we should place a high value on righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. We are to choose righteousness even over personal safety, righteousness at any cost, because we place such a high value on doing the right thing. Also, our righteousness, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20, is to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Here's what that statement is about. The scribes and the Pharisees practice an outward righteousness. Jesus wanted righteousness to come from our hearts. Our behavior was to flow from our right hearts. That would lead us into right actions. The Pharisees were so concerned about appearances. Yes, they would, as the law said, do no murder. But Jesus said, I want to talk to you about your heart. Righteousness involves getting rid of the hatred in your heart as well as not doing any murder. And throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus always took things from a specific behavior to what was in the heart. You shall not commit adultery was the law, but Jesus said, you shall not lust in your heart. So Jesus wanted to take righteousness to our hearts. And in taking righteousness to our heart, we exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus taught us in the Sermon on the Mount to practice an authentic righteousness. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1, Jesus said, do your righteous acts to be seen of God, not to be seen by others. Jesus talked about giving and about praying and how some people do that as a show. But Jesus said we can go in our closet and not let our right hand know what our left hand is doing, and just let these acts of righteousness be something that's between us and God, because it's authentic. We're doing it out of a love for God, out of that hunger and thirst for righteousness itself, rather than as some kind of show for someone else. Let's let our righteousness be authentic. And then finally, in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6 and verse 33, Jesus taught us to place the highest priority on righteousness. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Let righteousness be the first thing that we think of, and doing the right thing always be our first choice. And so, in the Sermon on the Mount, we are to crave righteousness, place a high value on righteousness, even above safety. We are to have righteousness as practiced from the heart. Let righteousness form our heart as well as our behavior. We are to practice an authentic righteousness, a righteousness because we really care about righteous things, not just the appearance of righteousness. And we are to place a high priority on righteousness. So Jesus practiced righteousness himself, beginning with baptism at the River Jordan with John the Baptist, but then throughout his life and ministry. Jesus preached righteousness in the Sermon on the Mount. But we can be glad that Jesus Christ the righteous, as John called him, also bestows righteous. He makes us righteous. Listen to the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. For your sake, He made him to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus gifts us with His righteousness. He bestows righteousness on us as heaven's gift. Jesus was described in this simple way in the book of Acts, chapter 10 and verse 38. Peter was explaining to Cornelius who Jesus was and just gave a marvelously simple description of Jesus. Here's what Peter said to the crowd that was gathered in Cornelius' house as he introduced them to Jesus Christ the righteous. He said about Jesus, he went about doing good. And that's what this lesson is about for all of us. Righteousness has to do with our behavior, craving everything that's good, loving every good thing. And so, like Jesus, our life becomes about going about and doing good. Fulfill righteousness, crave righteousness, value doing the right thing, have a heart that loves right things, be authentic in our righteous behavior, doing that because we love God and love everything that's good and right. Prioritize righteousness and receive righteousness from Jesus Christ, the righteous.